Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what is sure to be a very special presentation for you. Soundscape of the War, Yiddish Songs of the Red Army, featuring Anna Shternshis of the University of Toronto and Psoy Korolenko, noted poet, linguist, and singer, who will draw from a recently discovered archive of the Yiddish music created in the Soviet Union during World War II. This lecture concert will focus on the ways in which Yiddish-speaking soldiers and their families made sense of the war and the Holocaust as it unfolded. Please welcome our very special guests, Anna and Psoy. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Michael, for the wonderful introduction. Welcome, everyone. And I just want to take a second to thank Michael and also Julie Chervinsky and Aaron and Miriam, people who worked tirelessly behind making this event run smoothly. Also, I want to thank Derek Pensler and Elisa Ben-Porat of two committee members who worked together on putting ideas for this conference together. I'm very excited to be here and learn from all of you. And now I'm going to start my presentation. Give me 1 second to ensure that this PowerPoint actually works. I hope you can see it. And now we will go on. My story starts from 26 years ago when the librarians of the Ukrainian National Archive found, led by Lyudmila Sholokhova, found dozens of unnamed boxes filled with handwritten Yiddish documents that looked something like this, like what you see on your screen, in the dark corner of the basement of the National Library. Each document was unique. Here's one example, for example, what they found. This is a piece of paper found in the clothing of a murdered partisan from a shtetl Lachva of Pinsker region, from a person named Beryl Lopatin. The note is dated on October 1st, 1943. And it was transmitted to the archive by a woman named Leah Romanovsky on 21st of November of 1944. I know nothing about the Beryl Lopatin or about Leah Romanovsky. All I know is that this paper, which you can see crinkled as it was found, was important enough to this soldier who was killed that it was tucked in somewhere in the pockets of his clothes together with his identifying documents. The text of that song, of that poem, talks about a child who enters the synagogue on the eve of Yom Kippur to look for his grandparents who normally accompanied him there. And he sees those grandparents and he is trying to run to them, and he touches his grandfather's shoulder only to see that his grandfather and the rest of his family who's in that shul are dead. This probably was written soon after the soldier encountered the destruction of Jews in a town where he helped to maybe liberate, or where he served in the Red Army. But this is the only thing we have left from him is that song. So this archive, filled with materials like that, turned out to be long presumed lost archive of the Cabinet for Studies of Jewish Culture, as a small kind of attachment of the Ukrainian Academy of Science. The head of that cabinet was Eli Spivak, linguist Eli Spivak, and the cabinet had a small department of folklore led by Soviet Jewish ethnomusicologist Moisei Beregovsky. And also they had another linguist, Ruvim Lerner, who worked there. I'm sorry that the only picture of Ruvim Lerner that I have to show for you is a mugshot taken of him in 1950 when he was arrested for conducting this project by Stalin's government, just like Moisei Beregovsky was arrested as well, being accused in promoting Jewish nationalism. During the war, however, and a few years after the war, Beregovsky, Lerner, and their team spent this time preserving Yiddish music, stories, and jokes from Jews living and dying in the Soviet Union, in ghettos, working in the Soviet home front, or serving in the Red Army. Scholars were hoping to publish these songs in a volume called Jewish Creativity in the Soviet Union during the Great Patriotic War. You see this beautiful, sexy cover of that volume that was done and ready to go, but due to the circumstances of changing Soviet policies towards Jews, such publications were not allowed, and then volume never saw the light of day. Moreover, Beregovsky and Lerner and most of their colleagues were arrested in the 50s, and by the time they were released from jail in 1956, they never came back to working on this project. This is the last picture of Moisei Beregovsky together with his family. He thought that his work of collecting Yiddish music and Yiddish folklore during World War II was lost forever, and he died thinking that. But thanks to this discovery, the Ukrainian National Library, we know that his work was not in vain and some materials survived. And today we will show you some examples of songs found in that archive. Now, because our conference today is focused on participation of Jews in the military, we too will focus on songs that were either written by Jewish Red Army soldiers or those that were created by people who were desperately waiting for these Red Army soldiers to come back home. So we've heard earlier today from my colleagues from Tzvi Gittleman, Oleg Budnitsky, and Konstantin Fuchs, and also from Marilyn Campo, a lot about Jews serving in the Red Army, also from Elisa Ben-Porat. So I will not repeat a lot of information about it, but I just do want to say that there is quite a bit of research on Jewish soldiers and officers, and no small thanks to the Blavatnik Institute. And as we heard earlier today from Alex Blavatnik, Blavatnik Institute collected over 1,200 oral history interviews with Soviet Jewish war veterans who lived around the world. And thanks to these materials, we can now say that we have quite a bit of data, and we can say quite a few things about what it was like to be a Jew in the Red Army. Thanks to these interviews, as well as many other oral history interviews with Soviet Jewish war veterans, we learned that even when Jewish Red Army soldiers spoke Yiddish before the war, as soon as they got drafted in the Red Army, they began to assert that Yiddish disappears from the public sphere. Sure, some of them write letters to their parents or to their family members in Yiddish, but what they tell us one after another during numerous, they didn't speak Yiddish in the context of the army. And, I myself conducted over 100, maybe 150 interviews with Soviet Jewish war veterans decades ago. And I remember specifically asking them, not just about, when they spoke Yiddish to each other in the context of the army, but I was also asking them about Yiddish songs. And one of my findings was that, well, before the war, they know a lot of Yiddish songs and they could reproduce a lot. After the war, they could also speak about some Yiddish songs that were popular in their families and they liked, and they could again sing some. During the war, this is the time, they said, that there was no Yiddish music circulating among Red Army soldiers. So this is the story we hear all over again and again from oral history interviews. But now, thanks to Beregovsky's archive, for this Cabinet for Studies of Jewish Culture, we found that actually some Red Army soldiers and officers were singing in Yiddish in 1941, 42, 43, 44, and 45. Moreover, we learned that there were also enthusiasts who collected that Yiddish music and other folklore from these Red Army soldiers. And these are some letters from Beregovsky's archive in which those songs arrived. One of the enthusiasts who collected music was Mendel Mann, a Polish Jewish refugee who spent 7 years altogether in the Red Army, an artist and a teacher from Plonsk in Poland. At first, he and his wife Sonia, who was from Rovno in Ukraine, ended up in Moldova in the Soviet Union. But in 1942, Mendel Mann was drafted in the Red Army. He was an artist in addition to being a teacher. And according to the family legend of Mendel Mann, he was allowed to paint General Zhukov himself. Not sure about that story, but I do know that during the war, he also was collecting Yiddish music from his fellow soldiers, and you will hear two of them today. So our first song that you will hear from Psoy is called I Lie Beside My Machine Gun. And as you will see in a minute, the song is both lyrical and angry, and it focuses on revenge. Again, the theme that came up a lot in our conference today, and also something that is very common in almost all Yiddish songs created in the Soviet Union during the war. We think that this song was probably inspired by Ilya Ehrenburg, the most famous Soviet journalist of his time, also Jewish, who published a famous article in 1942 called Kill. It was translated in a more politically correct way into English as Kill the German. And we heard earlier today from Konstantin Fuchs, who told us about soldiers who were citing the article in letters to their family members. What we learned from this archive as well is that many of the Red Army soldiers translated parts of this article into Yiddish and created songs from it. So this is one of those examples, and please welcome Psoy Korolenko, who will perform the song called I Lie Beside My Machine Gun.
Liege ich leben Pulemiot und schäbtja jiddischen Nigen. Warum mir risalt still, nurst du in die Griesel sich ficken. Warum mir risalt still, nurst du in die Griesel sich ficken. Der Mond sich mein freilich Städtel, wer hat es nie gekannt? Jetzt dieses Pusto-Menschen seinen die Stieber verbrennt. Nur siehst du a Reute Armee und sie mir a Pulemiot gegeben. Schlag ich die Deutschen, kedei unser Volk soll leben. Schlag ich die Deutschen, kedei alle Völker soll leben. Oh, ihr wisst, die Menschenfresser, oh, ihr deutsche Banditen. Hey, Pulemiot, ziel besser, sollst du kein Deutsch nicht durchsmitten. Oh, ihr wisst, die Menschenfresser, oh, ihr deutsche Banditen. Hey, Pulemiot, ziel besser, sollst du kein Deutsch nicht durchsmitten. Biff, baff!
Russia for this performance. Jewish soldiers loved to praise their weapons, their rifles, their pistols, their rockets, and of course, machine guns, because of course, these were the things that helped them to fight against the army that targeted them and their people. Above all, Jewish songs from the front lines and about front lines proclaimed loudly and clearly and proudly that Jews fight the war as men. They're not sitting out this war in Tashkent, and they do it not worse than other soldiers. We've heard today from Elisa Ben-Porat about this myth, the anti-Semitic myth that began to poison life of Jews, including those who served in the Red Army as early as 1941, about saying, well, they're not fighting this war. And those songs are responding to that rumor. Also, quite importantly, I think, this song speaks about Jewish soldiers revenging their people as opposed to just general Soviet people. And in this particular song, you will see like Mendelmann wrote the song saying like, I'm fighting the Germans so that my people should be free. And you can see on your screen right now, it's a blow-up shot from the archive where the song is preserved, that somebody crossed out those lines of the original song and wrote up the correction. And the correction says that instead of mein Volk, which in Yiddish means my people, it should say all peoples. In other words, the censors decided, or maybe Berigovsky himself, who was preparing this volume for publication, decided that the song is too Jewish. It's too unapologetically calling for liberation of Jews. And with this sentiment, it would not be published in Stalin's Soviet Union. The book was not published, but not because it was because of those corrections, but this shows us the process of how the scholars are Jewish studies in Stalin's 1946 and 1947, how they imagined this message and this work would be able to get out. And of course, they were not successful. Now, Mendelmann wrote a lot of memoirs, a lot of novels about World War II. After the war, he ended up in Israel, where he was involved in the Yiddish scene, then had a fight with Avram Sutzkever, a lot of disagreement, and then he moved to Paris. In Paris, he became an artist, was friends with Marc Chagall, where you see him on this on your slides talking to Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall devoted a painting to Mendelmann, which he called a Yiddish writer, and that painting is in display in Paris as well. So Mendelmann wrote a lot about his life and focusing on the war. One thing that he did not mention in any of his writings and any of his memoirs was the fact that he spent a significant chunk of his services collecting Yiddish music from his fellow Red Army soldiers. In fact, when I recently met his son, Tzvi Man, you see his photograph here on your screen, sitting here at the University of Toronto where we had this conversation, I told Tzvi Man about his father's work in the Red Army, and Tzvi said to me, you know, it's very strange because it seems to me that my father described everything that happened to him during the war. He spared no detail. You know, maybe he says it's another Mendelmann who you're talking about. And that's at the moment I showed him the notebook of Mendelmann from the archive. I'm showing it to you too. And this is when Tzvi Man recognized his father's handwriting. So of course it was his dad collecting these materials during the war, but also it reminded us one more time that history and memory are often telling us different stories, especially when it comes to the history of World War II and then generally history of violence. So another song that Mendelmann preserved for us also talked about a soldier. This time, the soldier has a name. He recorded a name, Osher Plansker, a 28-year-old young man from Tulchin who served in the Red Army. And he wrote a song about Jewish partisan. Now, there were about 6,200 partisan units that operated in the Soviet Union during the war. 1 million people served in them. We don't know exactly how many Jews were among them or how many Jews were among them in Vinnytsia region. But we do have this one song written by this one, Osher Plansker, who was a partisan in Vinnytsia region of Ukraine. And thanks to Mendelmann, we have the words. And now, thanks to Psoy Korolenko, you will hear the song performed for you.
Herois tate, herois mame, velkommen und nicht versammeln, sie nur mir wollen dem letzten Hitlerix von der Welt erobern, sie nur mir wollen dem letzten Hitlerix von der Welt erobern. Mein Haus ist der Wald, mein Geliebter, der Automat. Ich schlug dir den Deutsch, Batok und Banacht. Mein Haus ist der Wald, mein Geliebter, der Automat. Automat. Ich schlag dem Deutsch bei Tag und bei Nacht. Soll sein als der Asch von mein Boys oder wird lang schon zerseht. Soll sein als der Deutsch oder Feidig zersprät mein Familie Freud. Die Bräune fest, ich leb und schlepp mein Automat in die Hand von der jiddischen Partisanerjagd. Und dort wir leben Partisaner in taitschischen Ziel, fliehen Blicken, brennen Skladen, fallen Deutschen viel. Von die Quorim ihre Stimmen, es ist mein Volk nicht umgekommen. Wir werden kommen, von die Quorim ihre Stimmen, es ist mein Volk nicht umgekommen. Wir werden kommen. Ich leb und slept mein Automat in die Hand von einer jiddischen Partisanerjagd.
Again, we're here with the machine gun Automat, and you know, a very happy Jewish partisan boy. Thank you so much, Psoy, for this performance. We don't know exactly how many partisans were in Vinnytsia region or where Plonsker was from, but we know that the situation there was very difficult for Jews. Partisans did not take in Jews who ran away from ghettos unless they brought guns with them. And sometimes they even killed Jews who tried to join the units because it was just too dangerous for them to include Jewish members there. But we also know that sometimes partisans were helping Jews confined in ghettos in Transnistria. In Nikolaev, for example, they helped Jews to run away from a Slivner labor camp. They also operated somewhere close to Mogilov-Podolsk, home to a ghetto run by Romanian authorities. In 1941, it housed 3,733 Jews they all lived on 16 streets, barbed wired and separated partially from the rest of the town by the stone wall. Throughout the war, people there were shot or deported from there or to there. And on January 1st, 1943, there were 15,000 Jews in that ghetto, and 12,000 of them were deported from Bessarabia or Bukovina, so-called Romanian Jews. Among those Romanian Jews was a woman named Reli Bly. I wish I could show you her photograph, but sadly I don't have it. I just have her name and her dates of birth. She was in that ghetto, Mogilov-Podolsk ghetto, with her 2-year-old son, and they lived in a building of an old casino. Bly was a poet and wrote many incredible poems in ghetto, so popular among young people who were there that many people memorized it by heart, and others turned them into songs that continued to circulate until the ghetto was liberated and were remembered a year later when Beregovsky came to collect Yiddish folklore to Mogilev-Podolsk region. One of the people who remembered Bly's poems by heart was a man named Meir Gilad, who was at that time named Glickstin, who was a teenage prisoner in Mogilov-Podolsky ghetto from Romania. In his Hebrew language interview with the Shoah Foundation in 1997, he told the interviewer that Bly did not write any of her poems down because it was too dangerous, but instead people gathered in her room and at night, mostly teenagers, and learned her work by heart. That gave them hope, joy, inspiration, and a blik of humanity. 53 years later, when Glickman or Gilad himself was interviewed in 1997, he remembered several of those poems by heart and recited them for the interview. And I do want to thank Miriam Schwartz, my amazing research assistant, PhD student, PhD in Yiddish Studies from the University of Toronto, who found this incredible interview and made the discovery connecting that text of the song to that specific ghetto. Mayor Gilad was able to tell the poem to the interview in 1997, but we too found this document in Beregovsky's archive, as you can see, handwritten by someone, we don't know who, a text of a song called Stalingrad. It's dated from 1943. Beregovsky recorded it from at least two different children in 1945 who author, and it tells a story, this song, that a story of hope that one day Red Army would come and liberate them. Mayor Gilad mentioned that Rally Bly was connected to partisans and therefore could get some news about the Red Army, so she included this hope into the poem that she created. And because it was really dangerous in ghetto to talk about the Red Army, people always did it behind the closed doors. And but the poem was so important that some people sang it instead of just reciting it. And the way that it came to Beregovsky was in the form of a song sang to the tune Three Tankistas, Three Tank Drivers, a popular Soviet tune written by brothers Pokras. And today, Psoy Korolenko will perform it for us, like they sang it in 1945.
Sie ist ein schöner Sommertag gewesen, hat der Führer sie gesagt marschiert, haben sie wie die Barbaren Porden, viel dieser Weltgrenzen passiert, haben sie wie die Barbaren Porden, viel dieser Weltgrenzen passiert, ihre Tanks haben gespielt Feier und vernichtet Dorf und Feld und Stadt, bis der Wolke seinen See gekommen und geblieben stehen bei Stalingrad, bis der Wolke seinen See gekommen und geblieben stehen bei Stalingrad. Stalingrad, das wirst du nicht bekommen. Stalingrad wird bringen dir der Teut. Mit dein Blut will mir die Wolke farben. Sie wird fließen weiter Feierreut. Mit dein Blut will mir die Wolke farben. Sie wird fließen weiter Feierreut. Bis der Moskwe seinen See gekommen. Doch gegen Deutsch wird nie den Kreml sein. Moskwe wird von Zäune sich nicht beugen. Moskwe zittert nicht vor kein Tyrann. Moskwe wird von Zäune sich nicht beugen. Moskwe zittert nicht vor kein Tyrann. Über Finnland seinen See gegangen und vor Leningrad sich abgestellt. Du wirst kein Mal Leningrad erlangen. Leningrad ist tiefer wie ein Held. Du wirst kein Mal Leningrad erlangen. Leningrad ist tiefer wie ein Held. Leningrad, das wirst du nicht besiegen. Leningrad steht zu der Schlacht bereit. Leningrad, die Stadt mit größten Namen, von dem größten Mensch von unserer Zeit. Leningrad, die Stadt mit größten Namen, von dem größten Mensch von unserer Zeit. Und das sind auf alle weite Fronten, läuft der Feind zum Grenzschein zurück. Zu befreien seine Dörfer und Felder, kämpft vereint die Reute Republik. Zu befreien seine Dörfer und Felder, kämpft vereint die Reute Republik. Sie befreien die schöne Ukraine, wie der Welt größte Städte stehen. Heinte seinen Bader Beresine und euch weitergehen. Es marschieren die Reute Divisionen, wie ein Mensch zum Heldenteut bereit, und zum größten Jonte von Oktober, sie von Säune Kiew befreit, und zum größten Jonte von Oktober, sie von Säune Kiew befreit, sie befreien die schöne Ukraine, die der Welt größte Städte stehen, heim seinen bei der Beresine, und morgen werden wir euch weitergehen. Und ich seh die Reutermeier gehen, mit der Reuter vom Verlandsee ziehen, bald werden die Reuter von den Wehen auf die Dächer von der Stadt Berlin, bald werden die Reuter von den Wehen auf die Dächer von der Stadt Berlin, tritt an Kista, trivisiolich druga, Ekipage, Maschine, boyevoi.
Thank you. It is strange to think of this song as being illegal because, to us with our sensitivities of the 21st century, we think of it as a Soviet song, that how could that be illegal? But of course, it's created and performed in ghetto. Then any dream of resistance or liberation, all this seems completely a product of imagination. Now, so many songs in this Bergovsky's collection were written by women, some of whom were in ghettos like Rally Bly, and others were evacuated to the Soviet rear, some in the Ural Mountains and others to Kazakhstan and Tajikistan. And in 1941, the Soviet government announced a draft of women into the Red Army, and some women also volunteered, and about 900,000 women served in the Red Army, were in combat. Usually they served in medical and provision sections, but also as pilots, spies, and even infantry members. Now, we don't know how many of these women were Jews, but we do know that a number of women were drafted in 1941 from Chuvashia region of Ukraine. Chuvashia, not of Ukraine, of course. Chuvashia region of the Soviet Union, home to about 50,000 evacuees, and Jews among them. And among those evacuees was an enthusiast, a poet, Hirsch Kleiner. Again, I don't have a photo to show you, who spent the war collecting songs about from Jewish refugees and evacuees in Chuvashia. And one of the songs that he found was this one called "The Daughters of Chuvashia." It was written in 1942 as a comment on women serving in the Red Army. The song does not talk about Jewish women specifically, but it is in Yiddish, and he collected that song from a woman named Clara Rosenberg. So the song does talk about the sentiment, the shared sentiment of Jews and non-Jews at the time about hoping to fight the war against fascism. And now Psoy will perform it for us.
Mich fragen die Sternensogwärter, wer etwas marschiert spät bei Nacht, an entwert Schuwaschsker Töchter, gräten sich gehen in Schlacht. Hört nur, wie fest sie tritt, es klingt unser Sieg in dem Gang, wie artig sie ihr Lied, wie freudig ist das Gesang. Funken sich über die Sterne, wir haben also jetzt nicht gesehen, wo singen sie lang wir uns Herren und Mut in Schlacht da reingehen. Es Herren die Sterne in Himmel, wir haben a Schwur gegeben, nicht ruhen, nicht klappen, kein Drimmel, nicht scheuen a viele du zu leben. Wir müssen die Sonne im Verwissen, wir haben gehäuben die Hand, a Teut war a Teut, die Faschisten, war Stalin, die Krieg war ein Land. Die Lied hat sich nur was gedigt, a Stern hat sich abgerissen, wie der Bagrissen. Die Lieder hat sich noch was genickt, a Stern hat sich abgerissen, wie Gleichen von Himmel schickt die Tschuwaschker Tächter Bagrissen.
Thank you, Pasha. So the last song and the last story we're going to tell you today is the only song, is the only piece in today's program that was actually published in 1943 in Soviet Yiddish weekly called Einika at Unity. It was recorded by a folklorist named Sholem Kupperschmidt somewhere in the Soviet area. We don't know exactly where at that time. And the song tells a story of a man named Yoshka, who is a Red Army soldier and who destroys Germans without mercy. In fact, you will see in a second, the song is so violent and is so graphic in description of this violence that it could be a little disturbing. In fact, Psoy and I got in a little trouble a few years ago when he performed that song on Austrian national radio, and the listeners called to complain about exceptional cruelty of the music that they heard. Indeed, the enemy is referred to as kela, a Yiddish word that describes a professional that slices non-kosher animals, such as pigs and horses, without any mercy or consideration for their well-being. In folklore, kela refers to especially cruel and merciless butcher. So the song uses this term in order to emphasize the brutality of Germans and sometimes their non-human nature, again, borrowed from Ilya Ehrenburg. So this song, of course, is not written by a soldier, although who knows, but we think it's someone who is waiting for him by this woman named Berta Flaxman from Zhytomyr. And it came to us as this text that... hold on, that I think you see on the screen, but no. Sorry, you see something wrong on the screen. It came to us in the form of this newspaper without the tune. And Psoy decided to set it to the music of Mikhail Glinka, to the song called Skylark. The song was extremely popular in the Soviet Union right before the war. It was performed by a Soviet artist, Sergei Lemeshev, widely considered a sex symbol of Soviet 1930s. So we thought that this Berta Flaxman from Zhytomyr would have wanted to hear that song, imagining her hero as handsome as Lemeshev and as brave as only Yoshka from Odessa can be. So please welcome Psoy Korolenko with our last song, Yoshka from Odessa.
Von der Eintiker Milchome will ich Lieder singen, als mir soll die ganze Welt mit die Lieder klingen. Dies ist vorgekommen dort mit Joschka dem Odesser, als hat geschlagen sich mit dem Feind auf Messer. Mörderische Zores hat bald geschworen, sei kurz machen die Schures. Hey, dein Verkehrs, war ich euch, war a waschner Kehle, was es wird man von euch schneiden, wie von einer Höhle. Die Säugkinder, was hat ihr lebendig begraben, wird ihr Treife Hitler, sei rauskommen nicht kommen, weil ihr hat die schöne Stadt wüste gemacht und Chorev fahren Lebmeier, die der sich nicht drei Messles gehobelt, Water durcheinander mit Feier. Joschke hat nicht ausgelost, und a Keul sein Speier, aber die Faschisten auch generigt ohne Steiger, auf der Erde gefallen ist ein Peiger, bleib mal Peiger. Joschke hat doch noch gewollt sein Vaterland beschützen. Hat und Rachmone sich zerrechnet mit die Friesen. Hitler muss da sich herabzunehmen. Joschkes Namen wird auf ewig riemen sich und schämen. Hitler muss da sich herabzunehmen. Joschkes Namen wird auf ewig riemen sich und schämen.
Thank you, Pasha. I'll just conclude by saying that most people whose song you heard today and whose stories we told you did not live to see the time when their lives and music will become of interest to people around the world. All scholars involved in the project of collecting this music were either killed or arrested or jailed for it. None of them was able to return to this work in the 50s when they were liberated from these jails. We are honored that you spend this afternoon and evening with them, with their songs and with their stories. We're happy to answer your questions, and we too hope for the world of free of fascism, where people who wrote the songs in the midst of violence that no human being should experience are not forgotten. Huge thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Psoy. This was really a very special and wonderful program, and really quite privileged that we had the opportunity to participate with you. It looks like we do not have any questions in the Q&A at this moment. You have left our audience stunned and enlightened and engaged. So we are going to say thank you. We're going to remind everyone that tomorrow the conference starts at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. We have a special presentation at that time, and we hope that you will return to join us. We also will be sending out an email early in the morning, or depending on what part of the world you're in, early in the afternoon tomorrow. So thank you once again. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Psoy. This was really quite special. Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful evening, and thank you for being with us here at the Blavatnik Archive for Jewish soldiers and fighters in World War II. We will see you tomorrow.